Great. So we are here today to talk about assessments and observations in early education programs. I'm super glad that you are joining us for this webinar. Those of you that are participating live on Facebook Live, welcome. I appreciate you being here, and you've got this live instructor-led training event that's happening. Those of you that are watching the recorded video and doing the self-instructional training, we are glad that you're watching the video. However you're able to get it, that's what is most important right here. Before we get started, let's go ahead and go over some housekeeping items really quick. This training has been approved by the Texas Early Childhood Professional Development System and does have a TechPEDS training ID. So make sure that you have your personal TechPEDS Workforce ID number on your Tim the Trainer portal before you do your assessment at the end of the webinar. That way your training certificate will automatically be uploaded into your personal TechPEDS account and will automatically be verified. So that is really important right there. Also, just a reminder, per the child care minimum standards, trainings must be completed in a reasonable amount of time, which basically means you should not be completing more clock hours of training in a single day than the number of hours that you worked in that day. Definitely cannot complete more clock hours of training in a single day than the total number of hours there are in a day or in a waking day. Also, you can see the definition of instructor-led training in the Child Care Minimum Standard 746.123. It is up to the director and the individual participant to get with their local licensing inspector or their Texas Rising Star mentor for their interpretation of the definition of instructor-led training versus self-instructional. We do have the opportunity for you to interact with us in a timely manner, either on our website, timthetrainer.com, in the upper right-hand corner. You can send us a direct message. You can email us. You can call us with any questions that you have. If you need more information beyond the scope of the training material, or if you need additional resources to help support you in your school. And we do respond to you pretty quickly in a timely manner. So know that we are always there for you. All right, let's go ahead and start talking about assessments and observations. So our objectives for today, as we go through this material, we want to talk about the purpose of doing assessments and observations in your program, why it's so important to take that bird's eye view into what's going on in your classroom, what's going on with an individual child, and kind of taking that step back, getting yourself away from the interaction and engagement so you can really just watch and listen to what's going on. Really important. And I want to make the point that assessments and observations are different than supervising and interacting. All right? So I want y'all to kind of think of two different buckets that you might have. All right? Assessments and observations are in one bucket. Supervising, supervision, and engagement is in a completely different bucket. Okay? You can't really assess and observe when you're also supervising and engaging. Okay? So while you can be attuned and you can be aware of what's going on in your classroom when you're supervising and engaging, it's not the same as assessments and observations. All right? We're going to talk about identifying appropriate observation techniques and tools for gathering, developmental information right there. And then we'll talk about how to use observations and assessment data to support individual planning and communication with families. So how do you share this important information with you right here? All right. Great. Just kind of talk about the benefits of this particular training right here. We want to enhance your abilities to effectively observe, assess, and support children's development, leading to intentional teaching, better communication with the families, and improved outcome for the children in care. So that's what we're going for right here. All right, I wanted to just add this very, very important reminder. All right, and there's, again, I've already gone over the objectives that we have for today's training, but please make sure that you get this part right here. Supervision and safety always comes first. All right. The safety and the supervision of the children always comes first. Assessments and observations are second. All right. Especially if you're doing assessments and observations on an app or on a tablet. Okay. Whether you're using a written format, a developmental tool, whatever it might be, that is not your number one priority. Your number one priority is always the health and safety of the children, okay? So please make sure we've got that. If you are able to do assessments and observations when you are not responsible for the group of children in care, that is always best case scenario right there. So be out of ratio when you're doing that assessment and observation. Like I said at the beginning, the way we want to look at assessments and observations is you want to be able to take that bird's eye view of what's going on with a child, what's going on with a particular classroom. And you can't take that bird's eye view when you're responsible for the group of children and counted in child staff ratio and having to supervise that group of children adequately. All right, so please keep this in mind as we go through this material right here. All right, so this is going to be a pretty short webinar today. I don't think we're going to go the whole hour. We'll see. But really what I've got planned for this is we're going to look at planning and evaluating assessments and observations. This is a really critical piece to this. And it's the piece that I see missing most often, is that people just want to grab an assessment tool and go into a classroom and start an observation, and there's no planning that takes place first. I think that the planning is the biggest piece of this, all right? And then not just the planning, but the evaluating that takes place afterwards. So I want you to think of it as like two bookends, all right? You've got the planning that happens at the beginning, you've got the assessment and the observation, and then you've got the evaluating and reflecting time that happens on the end. We're going to talk about building portfolios, and I like it when you are able to create portfolios for a child that begins in an infant classroom. So whenever you first get the child at 6 weeks or 2 months or 3 months, whenever you enroll that child in your program, and if you're able to retain that child, throughout their early education career until they graduate the pre-K program, now you've got this amazing portfolio that can be given to this family that goes across their entire developmental span from infant room to, the age of 5. I talk a lot in my trainings about the developmental blueprint, especially for social and emotional learning. And this is like an imaginary blueprint per se when we talk about this in trainings. But when you do a portfolio from birth to, the age of 5, and you've got this incredible binder that has 5 years worth of assessments and observations, man, what an incredible tool, what an incredible gift to that family, especially if there are later delays or later issues that come up with that child, this is going to be very helpful to the family. All right. It's also just a really nice keepsake, right? Observing with purpose. All right. We're going to talk about that here in just a second too. Like, what is the purpose for the observation and the assessment? We got to really get the microscope out and really zoom in on behavior or skills or milestones that need additional attention. So when we're talking about observing with purpose, it's about looking through that microscope and really zooming in. We'll kind of talk about different types of observations, and I've got a resource that I'm going to provide with you as well. And then summarizing this information in a professional manner. All right. So that's always part of this right here. Assessments and observations are legal documents. All right. So, all of this stuff, we want to be able to share it with families and guardians to be able to support the child. But in the event of litigation or a legal case were to come about, you can have assessments and observations subpoenaed. All right. So they are legal documents. So when you're completing these, they need to be factual. They need to be done in a professional manner. Grammar and spelling are very important. All right. When completing an observation or assessment. And they need to be free of judgment or opinion. All right. You document, what do you see? What do you hear? You do not document what you think or what you assume. All right. What do you see? What do you hear? All right. We want to avoid third-party information that is brought into assessments and observations. So your summary is going to be based off of facts. All right. Really important right there for you. So again, kind of going back to, I think we talk about this in almost every single training, especially when we talk about behavior and development. But all behavior in a classroom, whether you want to perceive this as positive or negative, okay, I don't like to perceive anything as positive or negative. It's just simply behavior, all right? Whether a child is meeting an expectation or a child is not meeting an expectation, all behavior is an opportunity to teach. All behavior is also the opportunity to learn, and that's what we always want to keep in mind is no matter what your role is in life, everyone out there is both a teacher and a student. Everyone out there is both a student and a teacher, right? We just got to be able to flip that around. When are you a teacher? When are you a student? When are you a student? When are you a teacher? So when we talk about all behavior as an opportunity to teach, when we look at assessments and observations, all behavior is an opportunity to learn. Okay, so when you're doing an assessment and an observation, you are now the student, all right? And you are now learning from that child, okay? And y'all, we can take this into all different avenues of relationships, all different avenues of life, okay? Being consciously aware when you're a teacher, when you're a student, when you're a student, when you're a teacher. What is the child communicating? And when we talk about what is the child communicating, only 7% of communication are the words that come out of our mouth. All right. 93% of our communication is body language and tone of voice. So when I talk about what is the child communicating and you're completing your assessments and your observations, pay close attention to the body language. Pay close attention to the tone of voice, the moans, the groans, the gasp. It might be the excitement, right? It's the energy that is being put off by the child or the group, okay? All of that is communication. Pay really close attention to this. And then what we want to identify with our assessments and observations, what is the missing skill? So remembering, punishing a child does not teach a new skill. The only way you can get a different behavior is to teach a new skill. So a big part of assessments and observations is to be able to identify through looking at behavior, through, dissecting what's being communicated. And this is kind of a process of elimination right here. What is the possible missing skill? And then once you're able to identify what is the possible missing skill, then you've got to identify what skill do we need to lend to that child. And you may not always get it right the first time, the second time, the third time, the fourth time. All right? We're going to practice this skill. That didn't hit the mark, so we're going to practice this skill. That one missed too, so now we're going to practice this skill. But it's that persistence. All right? It's the persistence and that willingness to not give up on that child. All right? And again, when you're creating your portfolios, when you're doing your assessment and your observation, you're going to be documenting every single bit of this. All right? We have identified that this may be the missing skill. So we're going to practice, describing facial expressions for nonverbal communication, right? Or whatever it might be. And then if that missed the mark, okay, we're just going to document that we are now practicing another skill. And I like to use the word practice and not try, okay? So let's practice avoiding using the word try, and we're going to practice these skills. So, planning and evaluating. So when we look at this process right here, okay, so, step one, we're going to do some informal observations and documentation. So all of your formal assessments and observations kind of have a pre-assessment and observation that is done first. At what point is there something going on that you have determined there needs to be a formal assessment or observation? So, there kind of has to be, someone on the diving board getting ready to jump off, right? So, you do that informal observation and documentation first, all right? Evaluate the situation. You're going to take that nugget, okay, that pre-observation or assessment, match it up with developmental milestones, with professionally made assessments, all right, that come from a reliable source, and you can determine developmentally, is the child on target for their particular age, or is the child behind? All right, or is the child missing some skills from that developmental checklist? Okay, so you'll evaluate that. Then the planning part comes in. Okay, first off, whatever assessment tool that you're using, and I like to use 0 to 3, and I'm going to give you that resource at the end of the webinar. There are plenty of other assessment tools that are out there that you can find on the internet. Check your resources, check where they're coming from, make sure they're coming from a reliable source, okay? Or it might be that the family already has an assessment tool that's been given to them by their healthcare professional. But before you start the assessment or observation, you need to read and study this assessment tool first. Read and study the assessment tool first. If you're sitting in that classroom doing an assessment, and that is the first time you have looked at the tool, yeah, this is not going to go well. All right. You need to be very, very familiar with the data that is on that assessment tool before you go into that classroom. It's almost like you have studied it so much you really don't even need the document. Okay? Because we want our attention on the children. We want our attention on the child. We don't want our attention on these pieces of paper. And I see this so many times where I see teachers go into a classroom to do assessment and observations, and their attention is on the document and not on the child or the behavior. Okay? So you need to know those assessment tools so well that you really don't even need them during the assessment process. Okay? So a lot of planning needs to take place. The other thing is during your informal observation period and that documentation that you collect back up in step 1, are there particular times of the day that are better for an assessment or observation than others? When are you able to observe the missing skill? When are you able to observe the communication the best? Are there times in the day that are more difficult for the child? Are there times in the day when the child seems to be, okay? What areas of the classroom is the lack of skills, showing up? There might be certain learning centers that might be a bigger struggle than others. There might be certain areas of the classroom that are more stimulating for that child, or there might be a lack of stimulation in certain areas of the classroom. So once again, you've got to plan this very strategically so that you can get the best information possible to be able to support that child. Okay? So again, a lot of planning. Again, I'm going to go back to safety and supervision is always your number one priority. So if you can do the assessment or observation when you are not in a classroom, that is best. So the planning part is really critical here because you need to have adequate coverage in that classroom so that you can have that bird's eye view of what's going on. And then step 4 is the actual implementation. And then after step 4 in implementation, you will do your formal evaluation where you'll put all the information together. Kind of going back to that portfolio and building that portfolio. And I mentioned at the beginning that you can kind of start this portfolio of assessments and observations when the child is in an infant program. Once the child graduates out of the infant program, that portfolio is passed on to the toddler program. Then it is passed on to the preschool program. It is passed on to the pre-K classrooms. So it's a traveling portfolio that goes with the child. All right. And again, y'all, these are so beautiful. So beautiful. Samples of, children's work. And I like to attach not just samples of the children's work, but actual photographs of the child completing that work. Because we like to have those visuals. We like to have those real life pictures. That I've got this piece of art, but this is not just, a piece of art. This is the actual child and where they're at developmentally whenever they're completing this, all right? And then descriptors, okay? Because we don't want to just put a completed project in the portfolio and then 3 years later, you're like, I don't remember what this was all about, I don't remember the intention behind this, particular project. So do the descriptor too. All right, here's the name of the project. Here, developmentally, these were the milestones that we were focusing on. What was the intention behind the project? What was the child learning when they were completing this project? So make sure you're including that as well. Make sure that you date it. Any particular notes about that individual child can be included on those samples. And you can do that. All right. So again, items included in a portfolio, a lot of real life pictures, completed pieces of work. You can also focus on developmental milestones, executive functions. Which of the 12 executive functions was targeted for this particular project? All of that stuff right there. And especially as you're moving a portfolio from one age group to another age group, I really like it when you can pinpoint on the executive functions where the child is at, or if that executive function has even been introduced yet. All right. I do have a webinar on my website, timthetrainer.com, on executive functions. If you want to learn more about executive functions, you can definitely refer back to that. Also, I want to refer y'all to our webinar on attachment styles. Understanding attachment styles is also going to be very helpful in assessments and observations. Observing with purpose. Right here we want to talk about the key to planning and implementing your curriculum successfully is your ability to take time to see what is really happening with children in your setting. So I know I've mentioned this a couple of times now, but I want to mention it again because it's so important. It's taking that bird's eye view when you're not responsible for the supervision and engagement of the children, when you can kind of take that step back. Y'all, it's going to be amazing how you see things differently when you have that different set of eyes right there. Make sure that your daily teaching practices are so deeply rooted in observations that you cannot perform your job effectively without it. All right? We want assessments and observations to be part of your integrity. Right? I use the phrase all the time, especially this time of the year in September. You've got to reach them before you can teach them, right? You got to figure out what do you have in common with this child. You got to form that meaningful connection. You've got to spend a lot of time with that joint attention, okay? While you're having this one-on-one time with the children, it's also using assessments and observations to, we've got this foundation that we are building, and then the assessments and observations are like the frame of the house, right? So we got to build that frame, and it's a big part of your ability to do your job effectively, all right? And then the purpose of your observation will drive when, where, and how you conduct it, okay? And I'm just going to go ahead and say this right here too, because a lot of times whenever I see teachers and administrators that do assessments and observations effectively with the correct intention, they start to learn that what's going on with that child or what's going on in that classroom is completely developmentally appropriate, and they're able to see situations from a different version of reality. And that's what I really love about assessments and observations, is it does give you the ability to see things from a different version of reality. Okay? See those kids through loving eyes right there. All right, some different types of assessments and observations, both formal and informal types of assessments and observations. Brief notes. I am a sticky note king. I like to use a lot of sticky notes, especially if you are responsible for the group of children and you're supervising and engaging. When you notice a particular behavior or a comment or a piece of communication, both verbally or non-verbally, you can just jot it down on a sticky note real quick, stick it in your pocket, and then when you have the adequate time and your full attention can be given to adding this to their portfolio or their assessment, then you can do that. So those brief notes, really helpful right there. Formal anecdotal records that are part of the child's portfolio, that is, again, that factual documentation. What did you see? What did you hear? That you're documenting based on the child's current stage of development. Those are your running records that you're keeping. Running records are always going to include dates, days of the week, times, area of the classroom, which teacher or teachers were in the classroom, what children were involved in the particular type of play or educational experience. All of these are going to really help you be able to fine-tune that developmental plan that we're going for. Diaries, journals, once again, that are factual based on what did you see, what did you hear. Remember, we are not educated, trained, or licensed to diagnose a child. So when you are documenting, you never want to diagnose a child, okay? You do not have the ability to do that in most situations. Event samplings, we've talked about time sampling, so we want to look at all of that. Developmental checklists, there are plenty of those out on the internet. Of course, some of my favorites, once again, is those of you that might be working towards your CDA, your Child Development Associate's credential, your Essentials textbook and your competency booklet have amazing checklists that you can use to help support assessments and observations. It's, again, one of my go-to right there. And then environmental rating scales, those are also very helpful. There's environmental rating scales for preschool classrooms, environmental rating scales for infant toddler classrooms. There's even environmental rating scales for after-school programs and in-home programs. Lots of those that are out there as well. When you're summarizing your observation information, okay, looking at the observation as a whole, okay, what have you learned about this particular child while taking that bird's eye view, okay? What have you learned about the child? Do you notice any patterns? Is it only happening at certain times of the day? Is it only happening when certain teachers are in the classroom? Is it only happening when other children? Is there too much stimulation? Is there not enough stimulation? Okay. Is it early in the morning? Is the child coming into the classroom and their internal clacker is jacked up and the child is over aroused? Or is it when the child is under aroused? These are all things that we want to really pay attention to. What might cause or explain the child's behavior? Again, where is the opportunity to teach? What is the child trying to communicate? What skill is missing? What skill do we need to lend? Okay. And then when you're summarizing your observation information, does it cover everything that was observed? Did you notice anything else that was not part of the initial observation? And we're going to take a look at that as well. And that might create a whole nother plan for an assessment or observation. So once again, there are lots and lots of different observation tools, assessment tools. There are plenty of companies out there that will sell you their products for assessments and observations. If that's what you choose to use for your program, you do you. All right. www.0to3.org is such an amazing website that you can use in your program as a resource. It is one of my go-to resources out there. But they do have a developmental milestone checklist. It's very thorough. It's very easy to understand. There are additional resources on that website that will help you to determine what is developmentally appropriate for that child based on their chronological age, their developmental age, their emotional age, all of the above right there. So, go to 0to3.org. Just play around with this website. There's so much out there for you, okay? But I did kind of, and I know it's on the screen, so you'll have to manually type this into your browser. But I did kind of give the link right there to their developmental assessment tool. Again, I like it. It's very up to date. It's easy. It's a good resource for you. Once again, I'm also going to refer you to the Essentials textbook that's published by the Council for Professional Development. You can get this from the cdacouncil.org. Even if you're not going through a CDA course, I recommend getting a copy of the Essentials textbook just as a resource for you. It's got really good stuff. And there are several different checklists that you can use in your classroom. And then, like I had mentioned earlier, the competency booklets. And there is a new competency book that has just come out. It's on back order right now. You've got your infant toddler competency book, and then you've got your preschool book. There is now a 0 to 5 book that is available from the CDA Council. I think that these two books, and now the third one that is out, are some of the most underutilized resources that are out there that are absolutely amazing to help support your program, support the child, support the family. Anything that you can hand to the family that is professionally written and research-based is going to be helpful to you, especially when you're having to have those difficult conversations. The more you can hand them from a reliable source, the better it's going to make that conversation. So utilize these resources that are available to you out there. All right, fantastic. So that is our training, updated training on assessments and observations. I hope this information was helpful to you. For those of you that are participating in the live version of this course, we're going to put a link in the comment section on Facebook for you to complete your training assessment to receive your certificate of completion if you choose to do that. There is a $5 fee for the certificate if that's what you're needing. If you're watching the recorded version of this, then the link will be right there on our website where you found the video. Remember, you can always message, email, call with any questions that you have. If you need more information beyond the scope of the training material or any additional resources that I did not mention already, we are always available and respond in a timely fashion. So there you go. All right.